Buy it for life changed how I see value. It slowed me down and made me more intentional about what I choose to bring into my life. Instead of reacting to impulse, I started focusing on fewer things, but better ones, pieces that felt considered and meant to stay. For a while, it felt like the answer to everything. If something lasts longer, if it's made well, then it must be the better choice. It's a simple idea and a powerful one. But over time, I started to realize that it isn't a complete answer, because buy it for life doesn't apply equally to every decision. And when you use it without considering the context, it can quietly lead you toward choices that feel right but don't actually fit the way you live. Not because the idea is wrong, but because it's being used in the wrong place. So this isn't about stepping away from that mindset, it's about understanding it more clearly. In this video, I want to explore when buy it for life might not be the right lens, and how thinking more carefully about that has changed the way I make decisions through my own experiences. Because the goal was never just to make things last longer, it was to make better decisions. I still believe in buying things that last, in choosing quality over convenience, and in owning less but better. That hasn't changed and is something I've been intentional about for a long time. Even in my previous Buy It for Life video, I was very deliberate about what I included. I didn't try to apply that mindset to everything. I focused on specific categories where longevity actually makes sense, which is why I narrowed it down to those 10 items. But there's a quiet assumption behind Buy It for Life that often goes unnoticed. It's not something we actively think about, but it sits in the background of our decisions. The idea that if something is good, if it's well made, then it should stay with us for as long as possible. That permanence is always the goal, and on the surface, that feels right. It aligns with being intentional. It aligns with avoiding waste. But over time, I've come to see that this mindset isn't meant to be a default. It's meant to be a pause, a moment where you step back and ask whether something truly deserves that level of commitment. Because not everything in your life is meant to stay the same. In fact, nothing truly does. And when you become overly focused on permanence, on trying to make every decision something that will last indefinitely, you start to remove something important from the process, the joy of deciding in the first place. Because decision making isn't just about getting it right forever. It's also about exploring, adjusting, and learning what actually works for you. When every choice carries the weight of permanence, it becomes heavier than it needs to be. You hesitate more, you second guess more, and slowly you start to avoid taking chances altogether. It also makes it harder to be a little bit adventurous, to try something new without needing it to be perfect, to experiment even if you're not sure how long it will last. And that kind of experimentation is where growth happens. It's how your perspective expands. It's how you discover what actually fits you instead of what you think should fit you. Because life isn't meant to be fully figured out before you make a decision. It unfolds as you move through it. And sometimes the only way to understand what works is to allow yourself to choose without needing it to last forever. Your routines change in ways that are easy to overlook at first. What you do every day, how you move through your time, the things you reach for without thinking, they all shift as your life evolves. And alongside that, your preferences change too. What you're drawn to now isn't always what you'll be drawn to later, because your perspective is constantly being shaped by new experiences. The places you go, the people you meet, the things you learn, they all leave an imprint. Over time, your taste refines, your standards shift, and the version of you making decisions today may not see things the same way a few years from now. And then there are the bigger changes, the ones that redefine your needs entirely. The transition from being on your own to building a life with someone else. From having full control over your time to becoming responsible for others. These moments don't just add to your life, they reshape it. What once felt essential can become less relevant, and things you never considered before suddenly become priorities. Even something as simple as moving to a new space can reveal this. You realize that certain things no longer fit, not just physically, but functionally. They were right for a different environment, a different version of your life, but not for where you are now. And most of these changes don't happen all at once. They happen gradually, almost quietly, until one day you notice that something no longer feels aligned. And when you try to make every decision as if it's permanent, you end up optimizing for a version of yourself that may not exist for long. That's where friction starts to build. Not because the item itself is wrong, but because the context around it has changed. And this is where it becomes important to step back and recognize that not everything is meant to be approached the same way. There are still situations where the mindset of buy it for life makes complete sense, where longevity naturally aligns with how something is meant to exist in your life. I explored this more in another video, how I decide what belongs in my life, where I discuss how context and timing shape those decisions. But not everything fits into that category, and the more clearly you can distinguish between what should last, what should evolve, and what was never meant to stay, the more intentional your decisions become. So I started looking at things differently. Not everything should be bought for life, but some things should. And the difference comes down to something more fundamental than quality or price. It comes down to the role something is meant to play in your life. Because when you look closely, not every decision carries the same kind of weight. Not everything is meant to exist on the same timeline. And when we treat every choice as if it needs to last forever, we lose the ability to respond to change in a natural way. So instead of asking how long something will last, I started asking a different question. What kind of decision is this? And over time, I realized that most of the things we choose to bring into our lives fall into three distinct types. There are things that are meant to last, things that are meant to evolve, and things that were never meant to stay. These categories aren't rigid, but they give you a clearer lens. They help you understand not just what you're choosing, but how that choice should behave over time. Because when you don't make that distinction, everything starts to blur together. You end up applying the same standard to everything, expecting permanence where flexibility is needed, or settling for short-term thinking where stability would serve you better. But when you recognize that there are different types of decisions, something shifts. You give yourself permission to be both intentional and adaptable, to commit where it makes sense, and to stay open where it doesn't. You stop forcing every choice into the same framework, and instead allow each one to exist in the way it's meant to. And that clarity doesn't just make decisions easier, it makes them more aligned. Because you're no longer just choosing what seems best in the moment. You're choosing in a way that respects how your life actually changes over time. And once you start seeing decisions through this lens, it becomes much easier to know when buy it for life truly applies, and when it doesn't. There are things that deserve permanence, not because they're expensive, but because their role doesn't change. They serve a function that remains consistent over time, something you don't outgrow or move past. They simply continue to do what they were designed to do, and in many cases, they get better with use. They become familiar, reliable, almost invisible in the way they integrate into your life. For me, one clear example is my Rimowa luggage. If you enjoy traveling and appreciate the design and heritage behind something like that, it becomes more than just a suitcase. It's something you rely on every time you move through the world. I remember needing a quick fix while I was in Berlin, and the lifetime warranty process was smooth and reassuring. It made me realize that if I'm traveling at least once a year, the earlier I invest in something like this, the more it makes sense. I'm not constantly thinking about replacing it or searching for something better. It simply does its job consistently without friction. Another example would be some of the timepieces I own. These aren't things I acquired because of trends or investment value. They mark specific moments in my life or represent meaningful relationships. Over time, they don't lose relevance, they gain it. The wear, the small imperfections, the memories attached to them. All of that adds depth. They become more personal the longer I have them, which is exactly what makes them worth keeping. And then there's my bag collection. Each piece was chosen with a clear purpose in mind. One for carrying my camera while traveling, another for everyday essentials when I'm running errands, and one that fits everything I need as a personal item on flights. Their roles are defined, and those roles don't really change. Because of that, I don't feel the need to constantly replace them. They fit into my life in a way that feels stable and intentional. These are the kinds of things where buy it for life makes the most sense, because you're not betting on who you'll become. You're investing in something that supports you no matter who you are, across different phases, routines, and priorities. There's a kind of quiet stability in that, where the item doesn't need to adapt because its role remains constant. And when you get these right, you stop thinking about them altogether. They fade into the background, not because they're insignificant, but because they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do without friction or second guessing, which is exactly the point. Then there are things that feel like they should last forever, but actually evolve with you. This is where most mistakes happen, because these are the categories where identity and function start to overlap. I notice this most clearly in the things I carry every day. My everyday carry has changed more times than I can count, and each shift has been a direct reflection of how my routine and lifestyle evolve. There were moments where certain designs felt right for that time, reflecting a specific phase or era of how I was living. But over time, other needs started to take precedence. Sizes that once felt right no longer made sense. Designs that once felt essential slowly became less relevant as my needs shifted. These changes are subtle, almost unnoticeable in the moment, but they reveal something deeper, that even the smallest details in your life are constantly adapting to who you are becoming. The same thing happens with clothing. There are pieces in my wardrobe that once represented a certain identity, a certain version of myself that felt right at the time. But as my preferences shifted, those pieces slowly transitioned out, not because they lost their quality, but because they no longer aligned with how I see myself now. I've had clothes that I genuinely believed I would wear for years, maybe even forever, but eventually ended up donating or selling them. And it wasn't a failure of the item. It was simply a change in taste. That's something I've come to accept. Instead of trying to predict what I'll prefer 10 years from now, I'd rather stay aligned with what feels right in the present. That shift has also made me more open to learning and experimenting, because trying to avoid every wrong decision often limits growth more than it protects you. Even the way I style my home reflects this. The environment I live in now feels completely different from what it used to be, because my mental state and lifestyle have changed. What I'm drawn to, what makes me feel comfortable, what supports how I live day to day, all of that has evolved. And if I had committed too early, if I had held onto everything as if it needed to last forever, I wouldn't have created the space for that evolution to happen. I wouldn't have discovered what actually makes me feel better now. At first, it's easy to think that if you just get the best version of something, you'll be set. But over time, something shifts. Your standards refine, your lifestyle changes, your priorities adjust, and the thing you once thought was perfect no longer fits in the same way. Not because it failed, but because you've changed. And when you try to force permanence onto something that's meant to evolve, you create resistance with your future self. You hold on to things longer than you should. You hesitate to make changes that would actually serve you better, and slowly, what was once intentional becomes restrictive. This is where flexibility matters more than longevity, where it's better to choose well for now than to commit too early. And then there are things that were never meant to last. Not because they lack quality, but because their purpose is temporary. They exist to support a moment, a phase, a season, a specific version of your life. And once that moment passes, their role naturally comes to an end. You see this clearly when you're experimenting with something new. When you're trying out different styles, for example, there are always pieces you're curious about but not fully committed to. A shirt with a different cut than what you usually wear, pants with a fit you're not used to, or materials you're unsure how they'll look on you or how much effort they'll take to maintain. In those moments, it doesn't make sense to approach every decision as if it needs to last forever. You're exploring, learning what works and what doesn't, and part of that process is allowing yourself to try things without the pressure of permanence. The same applies when you're picking up a new hobby. At the beginning, there's always a level of uncertainty. You don't yet know if it's something that will become part of your routine or just something you enjoy for a short period of time. And in that stage, committing at the same level as someone who's been doing it for years can create unnecessary friction. Investing in expensive equipment, long-term subscriptions, or memberships too early can turn something that should feel light and exploratory into something that feels heavy and restrictive. Sometimes it's better to keep things simple and flexible until you know it's something you want to carry forward. And then there are decisions shaped by the phase of life you're in. When you're in college, for example, it doesn't make sense to commit to furniture that you expect to keep forever. Your living situation is temporary, your needs are constantly changing, and what works for you in that moment is unlikely to fit into your life a few years later. The same idea shows up in a different way when you become a new parent. You know that your child will only stay in that stage for a limited time, and items like strollers or car seats are designed to support that phase. They serve an important purpose, but they're not meant to stay with you indefinitely. The mistake is trying to extend that role beyond what it was meant to be, trying to turn something temporary into something permanent because it feels more responsible or more justified. But in reality, it's just misalignment. Not everything is meant to stay. Some things are meant to serve their purpose and then quietly leave. What I've come to appreciate more over time is that buy it for life works best as a filter, not a rule. A way of evaluating whether permanence actually belongs in a specific area of your life. Because the real question was never just, will this last a long time? The better question is this something that's meant to stay consistent as my life changes? That question actually connects closely to something I explore more deeply in my video about how I decide what belongs in my life. Because a lot of intentional decision making really comes down to understanding what aligns with you long term and what's only meant for a certain season. And once I started looking at decisions through that lens, a lot of things became clearer. There are some things where longevity creates stability, where buying once, buying well, and relying on something over time genuinely improves your life. In those situations, permanence makes sense because the role itself remains stable. But there are other areas where growth, experimentation, and flexibility matter more. Areas where trying to force permanence too early can actually limit you from discovering what fits naturally over time. And I think that distinction matters because without it, we start treating every decision with the same level of permanence. We expect everything to justify itself long term. Every purchase has to be future-proof. Every decision has to feel final. But life doesn't really work that way. Some things are meant to stay with you for decades. Some things are meant to evolve alongside you. And some things are simply meant to serve a purpose for a short period of time before making space for something else. And once you recognize those differences, decisions start to feel more aligned, not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you stop expecting every choice to carry the same weight. I think a lot of us are drawn to the idea of a permanence because it feels reassuring. There's comfort in believing that if we make the right decision now, we won't have to revisit it later, that we can solve things once and hold on to them indefinitely. But some of the most meaningful parts of life don't work that way. Your taste changes, your routines change, the way you see yourself changes. And a big part of living intentionally is allowing room for that evolution to happen without seeing it as failure. Because sometimes growth looks like commitment, and sometimes it looks like letting go. Not everything is meant to stay forever, and that doesn't make those experiences, phases, or decisions any less valuable. In many cases, their temporary nature is exactly what gave them meaning in the first place. So for me, the goal is not to make everything permanent. It's to understand what deserves permanence, what deserves the flexibility, and when to allow things to quietly pass through my life without forcing them to stay longer than they should. Because ultimately, intentional living isn't about holding on to everything. It's about knowing what to hold on to and being at peace with the rest. If this way of thinking resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and explore my other videos where I discuss different perspectives on intentional living. As always, live with intention.